Hi everyone, welcome back to English with the Saints. So we're here today to talk about the context behind Christmas Carol. Remember, you are assessed for context in the Eduqas English Literature Paper 2 exam for the Christmas Carol section. So we're here because this is a former workhouse. So this is where people would have lived and worked in the Victorian era. So, what was a workhouse? A workhouse was somewhere you would go if you were poor and you didn't have a job or enough money for somewhere to live. And they were made deliberately unpleasant to discourage the poor from relying on the state for support. And so, this is a key part of Christmas Carol at the beginning of Stave 1, when the portly gentleman come to ask Scrooge for money for charity. He says, "Are there no prisons? Are the union workhouses not in operation?" He says he supports those establishments rather than charity, but they wouldn't have been charitable places to live at all. They were terrible. And so we see Scrooge's really cold, unfeeling attitude towards the poor at the beginning of the novella. And we see this also when the portly gentlemen say, well, people would rather die than go to the workhouses. It's basically a death sentence. And he said, well, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. And we see there another piece of contextual link you can make. Scrooge's words echo the economist of the time, Thomas Malthus, who believed that the poor were a burden on society and they were just a product of overpopulation. And there was nothing you could really do about it. Now, why was there all this overpopulation? It was because of the Industrial Revolution. And at the time, with the growth of industry factories, people were moving out of the countryside and into the city. And this meant that there were lots of unsanitary living conditions and really cramped living conditions. And we see this also in the Cratchits. So the Cratchits in Stave 3 are an example of a poor family. They don't live in a workhouse, but they do live in a four-roomed house with six children. So very, very squashed. And we see that they're a really sympathetic family. They work very hard to make ends meet. And this would have been a presentation deliberately by Dickens because he wanted people to care about the poor and see them in a sympathetic light and not to have the stereotype that they were lazy. And Dickens himself knew what it was like to struggle. He went to work in a blacking factory from a young age because his father went to debtor's prison. So he knew what it was like to work in unsafe, difficult working conditions, very grueling tasks. And so he wanted to present to Victorian readers in this short novella um, that offered people some amusing, sympathetic characters, um, a way to see the poor and to change and to care. It's a form of social justice that he was trying to support through this writing. So you can see that the context is actually really important. It's not just a sort of side thing, it's actually integral to why Christmas Carol was written at the time. And so when you write about context in your essays, you don't just want to tag it on the end in Victorian era, blah, 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 blah. You want to weave it in where necessary and where relevant. So things like where you see the poor characters, where you see Scrooge's harsh attitudes. You can talk about Dickens' intentions. Another really key scene is when we see ignorance and want beneath the cloak of the ghost of Christmas present in Stave 3. And these two children represent the ills of Victorian society, ignorance and want. And ignorance, yes, of the rich who didn't understand the poor, but also ignorance of the poor because they would have to probably stop going to school so that they could work. And so Dickens believed in education being the route out of poverty, and he actually set up something called ragged schools, which were for children who had to work. They would come literally in their rags and they would learn after working, so that he believed that that could get them a route out of their situation. So thank you so much for listening today. Hope that was helpful. Don't forget to comment and subscribe, and good luck.